What makes a movie is the editing.
The essence of cinema is editing. It's the combination of what can be extraordinary images of people during emotional moments, or images in a general sense, put together in a kind of alchemy. These are not my words, these are the words of Francis Ford Coppola. And the introduction to this you saw was the clip from The Cutting Edge, The Magic of Movie Editing, a documentary from 2004, which I would strongly recommend you try and pick up and watch. I believe it's out there on YouTube now. As for me, I started making movies in 2005, using game engines to make movies. Flight sim was my particular strain and fun to make with. From there I moved on to Second Life, and after meeting Pookie Amsterdam, we found that there's a market for selling these animations because they're cost effective and can be used to show some great visuals. I also moved on to work in Movie Storm and also in iClone more recently, and I formed my own business, which is Weebit Studios. But I still work a lot with Second Life and Pookie Media, as well as doing various real-time projects in iClone, and I also do an editing service for various clients around the world. When I started out and wanted to get serious, I thought I should learn a bit more about the trade, and another recommendation for you, sometimes known as the Bible for cinematography. It is the 5 C's of Cinematography by Joseph V. Maskelly. It's an old book, it's old rules, but they're as valid today as they were back in the old days of Hollywood. And one of the C's stands for cutting. If you can guess what the other 4 C's are, you get a prize by the end of the presentation. Let me just read you what Maskelly says in the introduction to the cutting chapter. Film editing may be compared with cutting, polishing and mounting a diamond. A diamond in the rough state is barely recognisable. The raw diamond must be cut, polished and mounted so that its inherent beauty can be fully appreciated. In the same way, a film story is a jumble of odd shots until, like the diamond, it is cut, polished and mounted. Both diamond and film are enhanced by what is removed. What remains tells the story. Maskelly said, "Only good editing can bring life to a motion picture." So where did it all start? The first films coming out of Hollywood were not edited at all. They were all done in one single take, one camera, no cutting. The audience just saw the action as it happened. Then in 1899, Thomas Edison hired a man called Edwin Stanton Porter, who was famed for creating the very first film that actually contained cuts, and that was called The Life of an American Fireman in 1903. Porter then went on to make one of the classics, the Great Train Robbery, also in 1903, and that's still used today in film schools as an example of early editing practice. Once editing became more mainform, they had to have a machine to do it, and the most common machine was the Moviola. It was a device used to allow a film editor to view film while editing. It was the first machine for motion picture editing, invented by Ivan Serurier in 1924. It was actually designed as a device for showing movies, not editing movies, but at the price was $600 in 1920, which is equivalent to about $20,000 today. So it didn't take off too well as a projection machine. But Douglas Fairbanks Studios picked it up and recognised it could be used for editing. That is how linear editing all started out. We are much more fortunate today in that we have access to digital non-linear editors. Non-linear because you don't have to run a tape through a spool and one by one check all the frames. You can jump anywhere you want in the sequence and jump back and forward, and you can move things around without having to cut and splice a single stream of tape. The main ones used today, the big three: Final Cut Studio for the Mac, and the other ones for the PC, also for the Mac though, there's versions for it, is Adobe Premiere Pro, and the one that I use is Sony Vegas Pro. All three of these are very efficient at carrying out professional editing work. You can of course also get some access to free tools. Now, Windows comes with Movie Maker, and Mac OS comes with iMovie. These are restricted because they only have single track editing, so you can't do all the more advanced and more creative things you can do with multi-track and non-linear editing software. There is a freeware program called Lightworks I've never used, but if you're strapped for cash, that might be one you might want to look at. For a long time, the importance of editing was not fully appreciated in Hollywood. In fact, it was viewed as a menial mechanical task with no creativity. And even when the Oscars first were launched in 1929, there was no award for editing. It wasn't until 7 years later that the first award was actually given to the editing job. There's an old Hollywood saying now that says a film is created 3 times: when it's written, when it's shot, and when it's edited. In the amateur community and small-scale professional studios, it's very often the same person who does the directing and the editing, sometimes even the writing as well. So there should be a lot more consistency between these 3 main stages. So humans have an inbuilt desire for logic and meaning. This is the fundamental building block of films. You take 2 shots, any 2 random shots, they are a stag in the hills and the highlands, and another shot of a man drinking a Guinness in a bar in Belfast. Cut them both together and show them to an audience. The audience will try and make sense of that. And they will. And they'll make very plausible explanations of why these 2 shots are put together, because we have an inbuilt need to make sense of what we see. Back in the 1910s and 1920s, Lev Kuleshov, who was a Soviet filmmaker, a film theorist who taught and helped establish the world's first film school, the Moscow Film School. He used an experiment to indicate the usefulness of film editing. He showed that viewers brought their own emotional reactions to sequences of images, and then moreover attributed these reactions to the actor. This is called the Kuleshov effect. He edited together a short film in which a shot of an expressionless face of an actor was cut with 3 different images. One was a plate of soup, one was a girl in a coffin, and one a woman on a divan. The film was shown to an audience who believed that the expression on the actor's face was different each time they saw it, depending on what they had come before. But we know the footage was actually the exact same of the actor. Then the audience raved about the acting, the pensiveness of his mood over the forgotten soup. They were touched by the deep sorrow with which he looked at the girl in the coffin, and then they saw lust in his face when he looked at the girl on the divan. So here's the actual original footage that Kuleshov used of the 3 different images in the same face, and see if you can detect any difference or perceive any difference in the actor's face, even though there's no difference to it. I will then let that run through to a more up-to-date actor who's known for his expressionless faces. You can probably guess who I'm talking about. There was a short parody making by MakeCrappyMovies.com, intermingling this star with different images, and you should hopefully see the exact same effect of perceiving reactions in the actor's face. This effect is particularly important for animation work because we don't always have a lot of expression and feeling in avatars or 3D model faces. So you can use the Kuleshov effect to introduce different context and surroundings, which will bring in what we think is an emotional expression on the actors. So with this in mind, you can begin to edit in earnest. Look for the shots that, when cut together, say something. Forget the 10 minutes monologue about how much a woman loved her recently departed father. Instead, maybe find a couple of shots, a shot of her with a tear in her eye and a gravestone. Cut them together, job done. In that brief moment between the two shots, the audience put themselves in the woman's shoes. We wonder why she's crying, and then we see the gravestone. We've all experienced loss of one type or the other, and we feel empathy for the woman. And once the audience feels empathy, once they care, you have a good film in your hands. It's a question a filmmaker should always ask when they're directing or editing a film. Why should the audience care? You have to make the audience care, and there are tools and techniques within the editing process as well as the directing process. Particularly, we're looking at the editing process that you can do to make the audience care. Tim Squires said, "Make the hard sacrifices to keep it short. Just because a scene is pretty doesn't mean you should spend 5 minutes on a scene that could achieve the same impact in 2 minutes." A good editor will strike the balance between visual storytelling and entertaining banter, always to make sure he's serving what's most important, the story. You have to take the audience on an adventure, pulling at their heartstrings and their minds. Sometimes that means you have to murder your darlings, as Arthur Quiller Couch said. Our attachment to a line or a scene or a clever visual treatment may blind us to the fact that its inclusion, no matter how cool or impressive it may be, does not help the overall message. Objectivity is the key, and this is why it's useful to remind yourselves to think like an editor. Because a film editor is not usually involved in the whole process from scripting, producing, directing, shooting on the set, he can take a step back with objectivity and look at all the footage that he has. Of course, if you're working on your own and doing this all by yourself, you have to strive to be objective and not get involved with decisions you've made, why you've made them, or effort you've put into in the past, and make the cold hard cut for what suits the story best. The Oscar for the 1976 awards went to Jaws. The editor, Verna Fields, was always at loggerheads with the director, Steven Spielberg, over the shark. Sometimes we look back at the Jaws shark and think it's a bit comical now when you see it in its full glory. But Verna Fields recognised this right up, and she was trying to cut as much out of the action of the shark as possible and focus the camera on the actors, the responses, the other action. And of course Spielberg was against this because he'd spent so much time getting the shark, filming the shark and getting these shots, but he eventually listened to the editor and they won the award for best editing. Spielberg later on said, "The difference between a few frames was a scary shark and a big floating turd." Editing can also be used to manipulate the truth. This is a powerful tool that can be used to the benefit of the story, but it can also be used to completely change the facts. Charlie Brooker, in his BBC Force series Screenwipe, showed how editing can be used to change the facts or change the perception in reality TV shows, which I'm sure we all understand happens to a great degree to make the scenes more dramatic.
It's also enabled reality shows to exist because now it's possible to go through 24 hours of footage and condense it down to 1 hour of highlights in time for transmission the next day.
Of course, the pressure of time and the need to tell a story means you often end up with a crude caricature of real life, a condensed bullet point version of events that can be easily manipulated to tell almost any story you like. Last to arrive, glamour model Agony Aunt and DJ Ashleen.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Charlie, hello. What we've ended up with is hours of fairly nondescript footage of us all standing around and jabbering.
It's shot from 3 angles, here, here and here. And we've also got interviews in which each of the flatmates say what they thought of each other. Using these ingredients, we can tinker to an absurd degree.
If we want, we can hunt through it for moments where it looks like Aisling's flirting with me, as well she might.
Here's one. Here's another one. Oh, and here's another. Oh, she bloody wants me.
Or we could just cherry pick the moments where it looks like she's not that impressed at all. That's just highlighting a particular aspect. If we want, we can be more devious than that. For instance, here, I get away with telling a pretty lame joke. What's red and invisible?
I don't know.
No tomatoes. But if we want, we can join the start of that moment to another moment that actually happened later on, and suddenly I seem to die on my arse. What's red and invisible?
I don't know.
No tomatoes.
On a more serious note, look at some of Michael Moore's documentaries, or some might say works of fiction. He got into a lot of trouble showing Charlton Heston in Bowling for Columbine in the 2002 documentary, which he was exploring the causes of the shooting in Columbine in 1999. I'm showing this to you as an example of how you can manipulate the truth with editing. I'm not showing this because I in any way endorse the NRA.
We started hearing shots in the hall, and then they came in and they all told us to get under the desk, and we all got under the desk, and then they just started coming in the library and opening fire, and I just started screaming and crying and telling them not to shoot me. And so we shot the girl, she shot her in the head in front of me, and he shot the black kid because he was black.
I have only 5 words for you.
From my cold, dead hands.
Just 10 days after the Columbine killings, despite the pleas of a community in mourning, Charlton Heston came to Denver and held a large pro-gun rally for the National Rifle Association.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for supporting your organization.
The main lie in this edit was the soundbite, cold dead hands, that Charlton Heston said was not after the shooting. That was a year later in North Carolina, nowhere near Denver. But it was a great soundbite and really enhanced the message that Michael Moore was trying to say, but it was false. Moore also tried to imply that the NRA set up this rally only a few days after the shooting, whereas in fact the NRA had planned this about a year ago and they couldn't change the date. Cinema is truth 24 times a second, and every cut is a lie. Well, sometimes the BBC even gets it wrong. In 2007 they had to apologise to the Queen, no less, for showing her apparently in a huff and walking out a shooting session.
The BBC has been forced to apologise to the Queen after producing a documentary trail which suggested she walked out of a photo shoot after a row with the celebrity photographer Annie Leibovitz.
The promotional video was shown to newspaper journalists and appeared on many front pages this morning. In fact, the pictures that were used are of the Queen walking in for the session, not walking out in anger.
I think it will look better without the crown, less dressy, because the garter robe is so extraordinary.
Just dressy? What do you think this is? I'm not changing anything. I've done enough dressing like this. Thank you very much.
However, not all manipulative editing is evil. In fact, you could say the job of the editor is to manipulate the editing to present the story in as powerful a way as possible. Mike Kahn said, "Editing is manipulation. We're manipulating reality as the audience sees it, because you want the audience to respond in a certain way." Mike Kahn edited Schindler's List, and Spielberg talks about one of the great scenes that was edited and shows how you can bring in the emotion depending on where you cut. It was in the scene where Schindler and Stern were having a drink together. Stern had refused to have a drink with Schindler up until this point. And watch this clip and notice when the cut is made, how long he holds on to each scene, how each reaction shot. All of that wasn't in the script. It wasn't on the set during the shoot. That was all decided in the editing room afterwards.
I've done what I came here for. I've got more money than any man can spend in a lifetime. Someday, this is all going to end, you know. I was going to say we'll have a drink then.
I think I better have it now.
What then are some of the rules for editing, and should you care? Well, I would say yes. I'm a firm believer in learning the rules. The Bible of cinematography is one to read, but there's a set of rules made up by Edward Dmytryk in 1984 in his book Film Editing. And the reason why I think you should learn the rules is if you want to break them, then you're better to know what they are first. Pablo Picasso said, "Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist." And certainly the rules have been broken many, many times. The New Wave movement in French cinema, when Breathless came out in 1959, I actually find that painful to watch because it is full of jump cuts, very intentionally. But that was the desire of the editor, to really make you feel uncomfortable watching it compared to the usual Hollywood style. And of course the Russians were doing it back in the 20s with their montage style. They were throwing out what Hollywood said and they did it their way. Rule 1. Never make a cut without a positive reason. Some scenes require no editing at all if the composition and camera movement are strong enough to support the intent of the scene. Other scenarios, particularly action and montage sequences, require constant cuts in order to communicate the scene's intent. If another take does not make emotional truth clearer or capture the action more appropriately, don't make the cut. Rule 2. When undecided about the exact frame to cut on, cut long rather than short. This is more a rule for when you were filming with film strip, where it's easier. If you cut a bit too short, then you've lost the film. It doesn't really apply to digital film editing because you can just press the undo button and you get your film back. Rule 3. Whenever possible, cut in movement. This is a rule I would strongly recommend that amateurs learn to follow. The movement of an actor or action should be continuous through the cut, and the audience will focus on the action and not the cut. And in fact, editing should be an invisible art. You shouldn't notice the cuts if you're doing it properly. And one of the strongest tools to do that is cutting on action. And to illustrate this, I'm going to show you a short clip from the game L.A. Noire. Watch this and see if you can spot how many times the cinematic was edited cutting on action.
You'll like this place. A lot of movie people hang out here. You like jazz, Cole? The hopheads love it.
Sure, I guess.
Big bands and swing I can understand, but this bebop palaver? How are you supposed to dance to that? This is Phelps, Leroy. Be nice to him. You'll like this place. They treat you right.
Rule 4. The fresh is preferable to the stale. Avoid boring, confusing or disappointing the audience with a poorly managed cut. It's possible to jar the viewer from the context of the story with even the most well-intentioned cut though. So be careful if your shot contains action that exits the frame. Don't linger on the empty screen even for a few frames. If you do this, then the audience loses the story and starts looking at the scene to see what they can spot in the scene. Always try to end on something fresh happening. If you want to have a few frames of an empty set, do it at the start so it's fresh for the audience. Rule 5. All scenes should begin and end with continuing action. This is the concept of the director shooting scenes with heads and tails and the editor subsequently chopping them off. It's entirely unnatural to begin a scene with an actor doing nothing, preparing to act, so you cut right next to the point where they're starting the action. Like an actor walks into a frame, picks up a phone, or washes dishes, or cleans a sword, or some kind of action. It should happen right away. And it should end with the actor walking out of frame, or slamming down the phone, or breaking dishes, or plunging the sword. Rule 6. Cut for proper values rather than for proper matches. Often enough, when you're filming on set, the action between two takes doesn't quite match up. If that's a serious problem, and if you try to cut to match the action perfectly, you might lose the emotion or the value. So in this case, you're better to cut with the emotion and continuity be damned. However, in our field in animation, that shouldn't be a problem because we're doing everything from controlled scripted actors, and with different virtual cameras we can replay the action as often as we want. In most cases, not all real-time tools or games allow you to do that, but you should be able to work around that and get the action to match during the cut. Rule 7. Substance first, then form. An editor must strive to improve the emotional power of a film. Technically proficient editors coming out of institutions that fail to address the necessity of substance and value in the art of filmmaking aren't editors at all. So see if you think I followed all these rules. I'm going to show you a short film that I made with Pookie Media. I directed and edited this one. The story came from Pookie Amsterdam and the client, and the challenge was to try and show off their product, which was an app for mobile phones which gives you enhanced security and privacy on their phone. And the client wanted a super exciting futuristic sci-fi fight scene, and the protagonist is also using his mobile phone, or in his case it was a wrist communicator for getting a message from his friend to help save the fight. And this all had to be done in about a minute. So watch this and see if you think I've followed the rules properly.
You sent that "You This Me" message just in time. I thought I was done for.
When you really need to keep this message just between you and me.
I would certainly say I'm still learning the art, and even though I've been at it for such a long time, and even before I was making animation, I was wedding videos and shooting concerts on old VHS tape machines. But recently, to try and really enhance my skills in the professional sphere, I've tried to learn as much as possible. I've even learned a few extra tips just in doing this presentation that I can take forward and start to change some of the ways I do things. I hope you've picked up a few tips as well in this presentation, and I look forward to any questions and answers coming along at the end of it. We all start as keen amateurs and we just go out there and make films, which is great. It's a great way to start, full of enthusiasm. Make mistakes, find out what it is you have to do to make it better. But at some point, you have to sit down and learn the rules, learn the trade, and develop that into your own art and style. Walter Murch said, "Film editing is now something almost everyone can do at a simple level and enjoy it. But to take it to a higher level requires the same dedication and persistence that any art form does. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I've certainly enjoyed making it. I'm going to leave you with one last quote from Joe Dante. Editing is where movies are made or broken. Many a film has been saved and many a film has been ruined in the editing room.